Thank you, everyone, for joining us here tonight. We welcome all of our candidates and the members of PCAR and the Home Builders Association. So our format for tonight is we're going to throw some questions your way in order to allow everybody some time. If we feel you're going a little bit long, we will kind of cut you off in order to allow time for everyone. So with that said, I'm going to let Garnet start us off.
All right, before I ask a question, I just want to help everyone make sure we understand why we're here tonight. As I hope everyone knows, we are in this country, indeed in this province, indeed in this municipality, in a significant housing crisis. In the last provincial election, for the first time since 1929, an issue surpassed healthcare in the minds of people that live in Ontario, and that issue is housing. That's pretty significant. What that means for the people in the audience and all of us is that right now our children and our grandchildren cannot and will not be able to afford to live in the community that they're being raised in. Used to drive till you could afford, now you have to fly until you can afford. Recent a study that came out that those that do not own a home under the age of 45, 72% of those people have accepted they will never own a home, and that's why they're leaving their careers, because they don't need to worry about those mortgages or saving that money up to buy a house. So as an industry, what we've been able to identify, and certainly the province, is where the stall point is at the municipal level, which is why we're here tonight, to see what one of these gentlemen will do to move us forward. We definitely need to fix it. We can no longer accept that it can take 10 to 15 years for an application to move through from start to being able to dig a hole in the ground. That's not acceptable. We need to build 1.5 million homes in this province in the next 10 years. That should really scare a lot of us that have children and grandchildren, because that's the only way house prices are going to come down to an affordable level, is if we have enough. That's why we're here tonight. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so within the City of Peterborough, we have a really good history of very well-designed new plans of subdivisions that are consistent with the provinces of Ontario's growth plan. Many of us live in those subdivisions that someone allowed to be built many years ago. Unfortunately, there's a lot of residents who typically own a home that lobby against others being able to own a home and have new developments and new projects get off the ground. We don't feel that's acceptable. Our question is, what would you do coming in as mayor to balance the need for housing for our children and grandchildren with those not in my backyard folks that don't want anyone else to have the same privilege that they do? Thank you.
Start to my left.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Henry Clark, and I am here to represent myself as a candidate for mayor for the City of Peterborough. An incredible honor, and I'm going to earn that from you. Housing is definitely an issue. We know there are not enough houses being built in this area. There are not enough being built in the province, just as was said. So what can we do about it? There are things that I believe we must address, because we're talking about market housing and also, I'll call it, affordable housing. But the root of it is a lack of building lots in the city, because frankly, a while ago, the city took its eye off the ball and we allowed ourselves to run out of lots. Now we're playing catch up. The issue can be addressed and must be through changes to how we do business. Every month's delay in getting an approval on a new house adds at least $2,000 to the cost. So what builders and developers need is predictability. When they make an application for a new subdivision, for an opportunity to do an infill, they need to know how long it's going to last. How long will it take until they can start digging and putting up a new house? On that basis, I believe we have to ensure that we have the right staff in place, and in the city we are working on that. We've added people in planning, and we are looking at the engineering department. But we also need new software. Amanda, which many of you will know about, is a way to give predictability and control to our building process. That is so, so important. But to keep things affordable, that the average person can have one, and I know just what Garnet's talking about. My son doesn't have any idea when he can own a home. But to be able to do that, we have to really bear down on what are adding to the costs. So we need to look at our density. We need to look at the length of time on our approvals. And above all, we need to make certain that we are getting the job done in conjunction with the home builders and with the developers and with our staff. The other thing we need to look at is what causes delays. And that can be too much time spent at the council table talking about site plan approvals and so forth. There are ways to improve that, to cut down by delegating some of it to staff and making sure that while we've listened to what the neighborhood concerns are, that we move ahead with good plans that have been checked, cross-checked, and are right. So I thank you very much for the opportunity. Look forward to the next question.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to that? Stephen?
Thank you. And it is a good question because the issue of housing, I've been politically involved since I was 14 years old, and I can recall a time where every single election focused on either healthcare or education. And in my adult life, to see housing come up as one of the #1 political issue right across the country says a lot about the challenges that our young people are going to face in the future. There are things that we can do to address the housing inventory. There are developers that are socially conscious. When we look at the affordable housing aspect, when you take into account properties owned by the city, what we should have been doing all of these years, and then going back to the time you were on council, Councillor Clark, is looking at city-owned property, tendering it out for development, and allowing the development community to build our housing affording stock. This is a community that a lot of folks move to, and they move to this community because of the green spaces. So our development community, with urban planners as part of their development staff, the city should just accept those applications and move them along. Where you have applications coming in with the same repetitive errors, my question would be, why hasn't the city then put together training videos so that developers know what the common errors are when those applications are coming in, so that we can move those forward a lot quicker?
Thank you. Jeff?
Thank you very much. Perhaps the most important moment in one's life is when they get that set of keys for a home or an apartment. That is always an opportunity in their lives to start that journey forward. Creating new housing that addresses the gaps in our community needs to be a critical priority. The process needs to include public input, neighbors' perspective on development, and it's important to understand that that's only one component of the development process. Decisions by council need to be evidence-based. If proposals are consistent with the city's official plan, the growth plan, and the provincial policy statement, they should proceed subject to relevant site plan agreements, plans for subdivision, and other conditions which might be appropriate. Our city needs new housing. As mayor, I'm determined to create an environment that allows the right development to occur in the right place at the appropriate time frame. During my 18 years as city councilor from 1985 to 2003, Glenn Padgett and I dealt with a lot of rezoning issues in Autonomy Ward. Here was our approach. At that time, there were no houses between Spilsbury Drive and Brayley Drive. So we met with the development community. I asked the developers to give us the information, traffic studies, environmental studies, 4 months prior to the application ever being filed at City Hall in the planning department. By going through those information backgrounders in detail, we were able to red flag possible concerns before they ever got to the council table. We worked with developers to get them resolved, and often enough, we had very smooth applications going forward, getting homes built, and getting the economic benefits of getting shovels in the ground.
Thank you. Victor?
Before I answer the question, I'd just like to preface my answer with a bit of my background, explaining how I came about to be interested in real estate. In high school, in the summers, I worked for general building maintenance, which had the contract at the county courthouse and various contracts about town, and in Lakefield at Lakefield College. So I washed windows and mopped the floors out there while Prince Andrew was a student. And I was also 1 year in charge of the Lester Pearson Daycare Center and cleaned it every day before going to high school at PCVS. And when I came back to Peterborough after living in Vancouver for 10 years, well, actually 7.5 years BC for 10 years, I worked, actually in Vancouver, I worked in construction as well, a bit of an apprenticeship in carpentry, but with the up and down building layoffs, I never completed it. When I came back to Peterborough, I actually worked in that subdivision on Spilsbury Drive, and I was framing houses there. And one time I was sent to cut the plates out of a doorway in the basement of a house. And the plates are pressure-treated wood. And I've always been concerned about my health. So I pulled out my respirator and put it on and tried to minimize how much pressure-treated sawdust I inhaled. When I climbed up the ladder and exposed my face, and my foreman at the next site saw me wearing a mask, he couldn't believe it. And I was an embarrassment, he told me. If another crew saw one of his crew wearing a mask, and I was fired a couple of days later. And it's not because I was ever late or I was lazy. No. So when it comes to creating jobs, I would like to see good jobs created, but sometimes these construction jobs aren't that great, and they're up and down and seasonal. And I also worked on Galaxy Cinema, putting up the parapets there, working for Dale Bright Construction. And at one point I was laid off from that as well, and I was working through Labor Ready, and I was hired for a day by Erica Cherney. And she liked my work, and I worked for her until I left to get my Bachelor of Education. She wrote me a letter of reference. I don't have it here, but in terms of real estate, I guess at the age of 25, I met some realtors, and I thought it would be a great opportunity. It just seemed to me a good career. And I was 25, and I thought, well, I want to have 5 more years of fun. I hadn't graduated university yet. I'd been putting myself through university working on oil rigs and in Lake Louise and Banff, at this Banff Springs, Chateau Lake Louise. And, but at the age of 30, I was in Whistler working at Chateau Whistler. And after 1 year, I was fired because I had been involved in a union organizing campaign. I had actually tried to help them get the dining room on the footing that it should be, and but my efforts were they told me I was being destructive, not constructive, and so I joined a union organizing campaign that was already going on. I felt like my job was threatened.
Excuse me, Victor.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt,
Okay.
Victor.
I'll get to my answer now.
Okay, thank you.
So I've told people when I got endorsements that I plan on standing up to some developers who seem to want to just pave over everything. And in terms of the way the question was framed, I don't agree that people who object to increased traffic, that their concerns need to be brushed aside and somehow City Hall should just ignore them. In terms of red tape, I've told people I would defend red tape, but I wouldn't put up with inefficiencies. If there's an environmental concern, it needs to be dealt with, but in a timely manner. And one of my ideas is to have a team of people at City Hall and one person be assigned to each development proposal and guide it through and be the person that whenever there's any kind of roadblock, and then have a mechanism that they can appeal to me if I become a strong mayor or whoever the mayor is.
Okay.
But
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, just in the
Yeah,
essence of
okay,
time, we
yeah,
have to
I understand.
move things
Yeah,
along.
yeah,
Thank
go
you
ahead.
so much. We will move on to our second question. So our city has some underutilized lands, both commercial and residential development potential. What is your vision for the revitalization of these lands? I'll start with Jeff.
Sure, thank you very much. An important strategy pursuing development without unduly increasing the development footprint is the development of underutilized properties. To achieve the economic growth that our community needs, we must seek to intensify development and take advantage of municipal infrastructure which is already in place and paid for. This would include looking at the viability of more secondary units and small-scale residential units. About 3 weeks ago, I consulted with my old friend, Tim Hudak, the Chief Executive Officer of the Ontario Real Estate Association, and Tim and I have been friends since our days in the Ontario Legislature. He indicated to me, and he's written the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Mr. Clark, that we look at the issue of exclusionary zoning. He is asking the Ontario government to make changes to the Planning Act that will allow us to, quote unquote, deal with the residential middle. Those duplexes and triplexes and townhomes that could easily fit in a lot of lands that we have, not only here in Peterborough, but right across the province of Ontario. And Mr. Hudak continues to pursue that issue of exclusionary zoning. And I'm prepared, as I said, to use exclusionary zoning and, where appropriate, to make amendments to the existing zoning bylaws. I'm also propose that we establish what I call Service Peterborough. No one has a monopoly on good ideas, so I looked right across this great land, and many other communities have developed the Service Peterborough concept, where we bring together the engineers, the planners, and people in property standards so that we can move applications forward in a very expeditious manner to get shovels in the ground as quickly as possible. My goal in life and in public life is always try to find a route to say yes. But we also want to remind ourselves that something that we've lost in politics, the great art of the compromise, can you meet me halfway?
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak to that?
Yeah,
Absolutely. You know,
Okay,
with-
we'll
with-
do Stephen and then Victor.
okay.
Thank
You
you.
know, with our unutilized land and the land that's there, when you look at the city at 58 square kilometers, that's the size of Peterborough, it's time to start building up and start building the type of housing stock that not only provides the housing needed in the community, but also provides the revenue stream that's needed by the city to cover its infrastructure costs. You know, it's great to hear Jeff talk about the 18 years ago and what was needed then and the conversations that were had then. You know, today we're talking to developers who are saying, you know, we're submitting applications and yet the information as to whether or not the servicing is already there to meet development. You know, the city's still asking them to pay for those charges to meet those requirements. And I think 18 years ago, Jeff, when the opportunity was there, that information should have been updated on an ongoing basis.
it
So
was.
as
As it
development
was.
was happening.
As it was.
Yeah, well, developers are saying that the information is not available. They're being asked to
there
pay
for the
for
last
it
4
now.
years.
Yeah, I'm talking right now. I didn't interrupt you when you spoke.
Nope.
So, you know, when we look at these opportunities of building up, you know, whether it's apartment to meet that middle gap for housing affordability so some seniors can live their best life by renting, also the need to build up for condos so that the city can increase its revenue stream to cover the almost $5 billion in infrastructure deficit.
Thank you. Victor?
Okay, I just wanted to add to that preface before that I sued Canadian Pacific Hotels for wrongful dismissal on my own. I couldn't find a lawyer to represent me against Canadian Pacific, and I won. So in terms of my answer for this question, I've stated I would like to sue GE to clean up their toxic footprint in Peterborough, expropriate that land, eject BWXT, which nobody wants, and then use that land for a new stadium for the home of the Petes and for other entertainment, the Lakers as well, and underutilized lands. That is definitely one of the major underutilized lands in Peterborough, and it's an ugly, cancer-causing eyesore. And then there's downtown, where Baskin-Robbins used to be, just sitting there. And that property on Lansdowne that Mr. McGee has offered to the city, and nothing is being done with it. And something should be starting tomorrow. It's an emergency, this housing situation. And I agree, houses need to be built. But houses, the people that need houses are on the streets, and they can't afford those units up on Lily Lake Road or any of the proposals outside of the city, those beautiful estates just off Burnham Park. We need more like wartime houses, and in the meantime, a path, the Peterborough Action for Tiny Homes. Somebody asked me if I had $1 million grant, what would I do with it? I'd give it to them. It's such an amazing team of people working together who recognize that it's an emergency. And somebody asked me what I think the biggest problem is in Peterborough. It's that people mostly don't recognize that it's an emergency.
Thank you. Henry?
Ladies and gentlemen, when we're talking about underutilized land and revitalizing, the heart of that really is intensification. And there are opportunities in the community. Intensification can allow us to make better use of our infrastructure. It allows us to create new opportunities in areas where currently there may be vacant areas. Think about Charlotte Street or the corner of Hunter and Water. Those are places that I would be prepared to have a sit down with a developer and offer city incentives to build. That could put more eyes on the street, more people in the downtown, more people taking part in our shops, our restaurants, and in our commercial establishments. The downtown is 30% of the commercial taxation of the city. It's our commercial engine for the city. So seeing that we do the right things there is so important. In the rest of the city, there's not that much that is underutilized in the sense that there's not already something there. GE would be wonderful. GE's made it plain so far, they're not interested. I would certainly try to keep the chain of communication open with them and encourage them to come to some kind of a resolution about that land. We are putting a new bus barn where the OMC once stood, and that is an exciting revitalization and use. But beyond that, I think that we have to look for the opportunities for infill, the opportunities to build higher, and the opportunities to continue to make our city more vibrant and more exciting. And some of those things will definitely do that. And I would continue to work with the development community to seek even better ones. Thank you.
Thank you. And picking up on the downtown that you mentioned, Henry, in consideration for the rise in crime, homelessness and addiction in Peterborough, and unfortunately, we're not alone in that. I'm seeing it in cities across the province and country. What is your strategy to revitalize the downtown core in order to encourage both investment and new residents in the city? Would you like to start?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, I can't hit a repeat button, but I do have to say some of the same things again on this one. The downtown is so important to us. And that means we're really talking about the problems there. Homelessness and crime. That has to be addressed. Homelessness means putting teams on the street, police and social workers, that can connect people to our services and get them off the streets. Get them into decent housing where they can face life's variables. Crime. 80% of what's going on in the city right now, the police would tell you, is related to drugs. So the police have asked for people that can help go after the pushers. The pushers, I want to make that point. The drugs that are coming down the 115 to Peterborough from urban centers that we need to get out of this community. We need to get rid of that poison that is destroying so many of our people. We can make a difference there. If we're going to really move forward with this, then we have to look at how we're about with the downtown and the rest of the community. The intensification is important. And if we're going to have people live here, then we have to create the environment that they want. And I do believe we can do that by working with the people, working with those with lived experience, and with those who can make a difference for us. Thank you.
Anybody else like to speak to that?
I would.
Okay, we'll do Victor and
What-
then Stephen and Jeff. Okay, thank
When
you.
I first moved to Vancouver, I actually lived in a hostel just outside of Chinatown, which is basically part of the downtown east side, which is one of the poorest, ugliest neighborhoods in Canada. And in recent years, Peterborough has been compared to that. And I saw and followed efforts in Vancouver to help people and that problem in Vancouver, and followed a Professor Neil Boyd at Simon Fraser University, who was ignored. But now, today, here in Peterborough and in Vancouver, people are waking up and actually listening to people like Neil Boyd, who are suggesting that criminalizing drugs is the wrong approach. You're just creating criminals. And people who want drugs, you can't eliminate them, so they're still going to be, it's just causes crime. And jurisdictions like Portugal that have taken a healthcare approach to drugs, it's improved the lives of everybody there. And when it comes to the downtown, attracting residents and investment to the city, I don't hear anybody proposing a solution that actually offers hope. And my idea is to declare Peterborough's ambition to be a center of excellence for the treatment of addiction and poverty and poor mental health, research and treatment, use Sir Sanford and Trent as much as possible, and house those people and take care of them. And when it comes to treatment, I'm not sure how many of you know about how 20 years ago, maybe, post-traumatic stress disorder in soldiers started to be treated with MDMA, ecstasy, an illegal substance, and it helped them. If you talk to anybody who went through a program like that, well, they would tell you we need more programs like that. And right now, across North America, across the world, there are pockets of healthcare practitioners and scientists doing research and struggling to get support. There's so many barriers. And so I think in terms of the healthcare crisis in Peterborough, the shortage of doctors, how can you attract doctors without a plan, a good plan to really help Peterborough?
Thank you. Stephen?
Thank you for that. And you know, in recognizing the contributions of our downtown businesses, 32% of our commercial tax revenue. It's significant because when it comes to solving our social problems, that income is actually necessary to invest in solutions for the social side of the coin. Building up our downtown is a necessary thing in order to start to transition our downtown. 50 years before the Regent Park, the Jane and Finch were the examples of Queens, New York. And the example and the lessons we should have learned from those was that you never cluster services for the marginalized or your impoverished community. The clustering of methadone clinics in our downtown has created a scenario that we're not going to see removed from the downtown until we start to decluster the methadone clinics in our downtown. When it comes to strategic plan about how you address your downtown and making it a priority for this community, given that it's the gateway to every community in the city, I suggest it's time that we remove the ward system. Every single counselor, and in my 4 years on council, I have heard, well, I cannot support that because it's not in my ward. When a counselor looks at it and says, I only need 2,000 votes to spend millions of your tax dollars, that's problematic. Because you need to take a corporate vision of the city, and every counselor should be responsible for the impact of the downtown and its causation. Every counselor should be aware of what the priority needs are. So as mayor, I would see significant investment of new dollars in our downtown. When I talk about the airport and the opportunities there, I see that also bringing new investment money to the community so that we can deal with some of those downtown challenges as well. Every door you knock on, I'm not going downtown. I'm afraid of downtown. I won't let my wife walk downtown. I won't let my kids walk downtown. And that's a concern because we do have some great businesses in our downtown and we need to do everything possible to ensure their viability and their success, because their success is also the success needed to solve our social problems.
Thank you. Jeff?
There are 4 key elements to have a healthy downtown. You have to have people living downtown. You have to have people shopping downtown. You have to have people working downtown. And you have to have people visiting entertainment centers downtown. It is a comprehensive approach that is needed. The report by KPMR for the Peterborough Police Services tells us that we need 15 more officers over the next 5 years. We need those officers, particularly officers that are trained in intelligence. When you have officers trained in intelligence, you start to track down drug dealers and stop the flow of drugs coming into one's community. That's part of it. It's interesting to note that a city that we're compared with, Brampton, Ontario, population slightly larger than Peterborough, but they police an area much smaller than Peterborough. They have 187 uniformed officers in Brantford, Ontario, as compared to 142 uniformed officers in the city of Peterborough. The second part of this is to make sure that we have robust investments in our support workers. Have them do the work that is necessary to have out on our city streets to address homelessness. The third factor in this is Peterborough is one of the few cities in the province of Ontario that doesn't have treatment beds. The city of Sault Ste. Marie, in the spring of this year, got $18 million to develop 20 treatment beds. We must work and engage our federal member of parliament, Mr. Smith. He has a good concept in terms of total wraparound services in the Trinity United Church, but we need to make sure that treatment beds and detox beds are part of that. As my family doctor always tells me, the best way to get someone off an addiction is get rid of the substance, and it takes a long, long journey to make that happen. And as we move forward, and one of the things I've always believed that we need to look at is create a new entertainment center downtown Peterborough. We need to look for a new home for our storied sports franchises, the Peterborough Lakers and the Peterborough Petes. You've seen what's happened in other jurisdictions in Ontario. Those of you that have been in St. Catharines, Ontario, have seen the new Meridian Center, where they actually revitalized 5 blocks on Ontario Street, which is the equivalent of Georgia Water in our community. And what that did it brought in more and more people in that community. The city of Guelph, they had a square exactly the same as Peterborough Square. They demolished it, built the new Sleeman Center, again, drawing people into their downtown, because the more people you have, the more vital your downtown area is, and the more you have public safety. It all fits together.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've heard a lot about, solving the homelessness issue, the addiction issue. I would put it to you that those are simply symptoms. They're not the actual problem. Everyone starts with a basic need too, food and housing. If you don't have enough housing, you're going to see homelessness and addiction grow in direct proportion to that lack of housing. Peterborough's a great example. We can't deny that. What will you do to help people understand the housing continuum and how building $1 million home helps get someone else off the street into a house to get rid of that symptom, which is the lack of housing?
Anybody like to touch that one?
Well, I was with you until you mentioned the $1 million home to get someone off the street. I don't understand why that's necessary, but in terms of the downtown and the people on the street, I don't think $1 million home is helping those people.
Stephen?
Thank you for that. The housing continuum is important, whether you're building estate homes, apartment buildings, entry-level home supportive housing. You do need a continuum of housing. There's a subdivision in the city, and I've always said to my colleagues on council, it would be wise for us to make the investment into this community to have the infrastructure there, because it is a community where I can see estate homes. Why you need estate homes in your community is, again, going back to the need for the dollars and cents to solve your social problems. You get higher tax revenues on those estate homes. They allow you to then, the reserves and the money to start addressing your other community needs. Though there has to be, I support the ideal behind the continuum of housing to get all the housing stock, and even exploring the opportunity of co-housing. We could be a leader across the country with some of these ideas. Selling city-owned buildings presented an opportunity to have private developers build that kind of housing stock for the city as well.
Anyone else? Jeff?
Yeah, the continuum of housing is crucial to a healthy society. As I grew up in the south end of Peterborough. And many of the homes in the south end of Peterborough were wartime homes, built during the Second World War to provide housing for a whole lot of people. But over that period of time, as people accumulated wealth during their careers, they moved up in other areas of the city, which freed up many of those wartime houses, which became starter homes. And you got to make sure that you have all those elements available, whether it's duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, single-family units, right across the continuum. One of the things that I was struck as me was rather odd, that these current council, of course, rezoned the Cold Spring lands. The Cold Spring lands were brought into the city of Peterborough in 1997 as a residential development owned by Aon. It was always intended to be residential land. So we've taken that element out of the mix and reduced the number of available acres now for single-family homes. It is so important. It's so important for the economy, because if you look at a new housing development, 100 homes, the economic impact it has is phenomenal. And as you continue to move forward that continuum, it frees up other homes, other residents. As again said earlier this evening, one of the greatest things you do in life is when you put that set of keys in one's hand, whether it's to own a new home or moved into an appropriate rental accommodation.
Thank you. Henry?
We do need to get people off the streets, and that means homes. Now, when you talk about building $1 million home, you may not see the direct relationship between that home and a person who's homeless on the street. But it does work. First of all, that new home provides tax revenue to the city, and that tax revenue can be used in other areas, such as building affordable housing. But more than anything, I think what we're talking about is we want a city that is prosperous so that we are able to minimize the number of people who are homeless because they don't have a job or a place to live. And I think that prosperity can come through working with our neighbors, Cavan in particular, to bring additional employment lands into the community, because without the commercial and industrial space, we've got none left in the city to speak of, how are we going to provide the jobs and earn the tax revenue that can take care of those people? We have to deal with the missing middle. We haven't been building a lot of townhouses and duplexes, which are more affordable for people that can live there and create more space for people in the other parts of the city. We know that we have homes that are cut up into cheaper places to live, and there's not enough of those either. But by having the tax revenue from new development, we can try to take care of those people who are suffering. None of us want to see people out on the street. And I do believe that by working that way, we can make a difference for people.
Thank you.
Sorry, I use the word continuum because we talk about it a lot, so I always assume people know what we're referring to. And you addressed it all very well, but I just thought for the audience, just to clarify, the idea is that in $1 million home was an example. Someone buys that, which means someone moves up, which means someone in an entry-level home moves up, which means someone in a rental buys a house, which means someone in subsidized rental gets a market rental, which means someone off the street gets a place to live. That's the continuum we're talking about. We need you out there to understand that and let us build some houses. So I have...
Can I just disagree with what you said?
Yeah, I'll ask my question
Okay.
and then by all means. But it is proven. There's a lot of research around it. Two things. There's two very powerful tools at the fingertips of the city of Peterborough and all municipalities, but Peterborough has one in particular called the Development Approval Process. All of us in the audience as taxpayers paid for this study to be done to understand why it is taking so long to move things through the city of Peterborough. The development we see out there on Lily Lake, everyone refers to, started 15 years ago. 15 years. Every single year of delay adds $36,000 to the price of a home. And we
I
wonder
wish
why
it
homes
would
are
have been
expensive.
canceled.
So, and that would put more people on the street. So there's a development approval process that identifies exactly what needs to happen within the city of Peterborough to move these things along. You also have Bill 109, handed down by the province, which removes the need for council to review what staff has already done. Two things. Bill 109, we're seeing municipalities, instead of embracing it, looking for ways to make it work, are looking for ways to circumvent it. What will you do to hold staff accountable for hitting the deadlines in the DAP report and embrace a culture that says we will make this work rather than we won't make this work?
Stephen?
You know, when I looked through the DAP report, and it, of course, identified some of the loggerheads at City Hall with our approval processes. Again, you know, one of that element that you look at, not only the software element to help streamline or get those application process in a lot faster, but you do have developers that have urban planners on staff, and then when that type of development comes in, or those types of application, it should simply just move them right along. I'm challenged by Bill 109 and some of the elements, removing the site plan approval process from council. You know, there is no cookie cutter approach to every municipality across Ontario. And in Peterborough, where we have so much value placed in our green space, it's important that, you know, council does have some eye on the site plan process. However, we don't need city staff becoming developers or designers or project managers on your projects. So we would apply a lot of the recommendations from the that report.
Thank you. Anybody else? Jeff?
Well, one of the things that I proposed, and I referenced it earlier this evening, is setting up Service Peterborough. That one-stop shopping where you bring together qualified planners, engineers, and the people that review and can approve a housing subdivision process. I've looked at Bill 109, and I have some interesting perspectives as one sat as a cabinet minister for 5 years in the province of Ontario. And when you look at things, you try to craft policy that you think would be appropriate for each jurisdiction. We have 444 municipalities in the province of Ontario, and they're all very unique. One of the things that I would propose with Bill 109 is that we sit down together with the local real estate association, the local builders, and look at those elements of Bill 109 that we can customize to meet the needs of the City of Peterborough. And by doing that, I think we can facilitate things and get these approvals made in a quicker way. It is incumbent now with the cost of building materials, the inability to find skilled labor often, that you've got to get these approvals approved as quickly as possible to get the shovels in the ground, to try to make sure that you have the skill base to make that happen. And as I said, if we look at customizing Bill 109 to meet the Peterborough circumstances with input of all the players in our community.
Thank you. Henry?
I'm talking here tonight to many of the professionals in the areas that we're dealing with, real estate, home building. You know our approval process is too slow, and we do need to address it. I said to the CAO a few months ago, I want to put a sign up in every single person's office, find a way to say yes. She looked at me and then smiled, because it's needed, desperately needed. Bill 109 offers some opportunities. The funding that has come from the province to hire additional staff so that we can actually make things happen. I've talked to many of the developers who are building in this area and the home builders themselves. What do they need? Predictability. If we say it's going to take 6 months in order for you to have an approval on something, it needs to happen in 6 months, not in 12 or 18. That way they can set their prices, they can line up their supply chain, and they can build houses. And that's what we're really talking about tonight, building houses. Because if people don't have a place to live, how does this city prosper? We need to have those houses for the continuum that we were just talking about.
Thank you. Victor?
Thank you.
Could you sort of repeat the question again, please?
Sure. The City of Peterborough has two very powerful tools to move approvals along. One is called the Development Approval Process,
DAP, yeah,
and the other is Bill 109.
right. Okay.
The question is, what will you do to hold staff accountable, use those tools to move development forward to get homes built that our children can afford?
Well, when it comes to holding staff accountable, that's a problem right now, because if the people elected actually start to look too closely and might offend one of the bureaucrats at City Hall, the city could end up with a huge lawsuit on their hands. So I would like to see a mechanism put in place where councillors and the mayor could assess, investigate, and see what the heck is going on. Because right now, I think there's a huge barrier between the bureaucracy and the people that are elected. And that is, I think, one of the biggest problems. And so in terms of when it comes to efficiency and people wasting time and delaying things, I wouldn't put up with it. I have no patience for incompetence.
Thank you. And believe it or not, our hour is almost up. That went very, very quickly. So I'd like to give each and every one of you an opportunity. Well, who's laughing at that? 1 minute to essentially summarize, and I know it's not much time, but I'm going to hold you to those minutes. So Victor, I'll start with you, please.
Well, I think the most important thing is the rising cost of housing, and people aren't addressing the real problem that Canada has no law against foreign ownership. Why is a billionaire from China or Russia or wherever allowed to bid on a property? Jeff Leal wants to attract the world's attention to Peterborough, and Doug Ford is throwing the doors open to development, but there's a huge problem of crony capitalists like Blackstone that will just leap on that as an opportunity to make as much profit as possible without any concern for rising rents and homelessness and all the problems that we're facing. I believe that a person should make a decent living from their work, but the profit motive in real estate, in housing, is out of control. And there are a lot of jurisdictions that have done it, that it minimize the amount of profit, or at least place a limit on how much money somebody can suck out of the people that are renting.
Thank you. Jeff?
We will stand for the conclusion.
Sure.
Well, thank you so much organizing this discussion this evening. One of the most important things we can do is to expand Peterborough's economic base. We're essentially out of employment lands. The last new greenfield investment that occurred in Peterborough was 4 years ago, was Fairlife. And they were able to build on the Coca-Cola site. And I had the opportunity to put together the team that actually brought Fairlife to Peterborough. But we got to look at annexation. Let's not kid ourselves. We need those valuable employment plans to make sure that every economic comes to Peterborough. There is no question. The dignity of work is so important for the individual. Getting up each and every morning, go to a job, provide food, and provide the opportunities for one's family. And as we talk about homelessness, we talk about drug addiction, we talk about these other social challenges, the only way we could do that is to make sure that we have the revenue necessary to make those key investments and to make sure we have more positive outcomes. You know, the ratio here in Peterborough right now is about 80% residential and 20% industrial commercial in terms of our tax base. You know, each one of us got to work together to make sure that we shift that rebalancing a bit. And that will also reduce home prices right here in Peterborough to make sure that those new Canadians and those talented young men and women want to come to Peterborough, because you and I both know that Peterborough is a wonderful place to live, work, and play, and seek your destiny.
Thank you. Stephen?
Thank you, and I do want to extend also my thanks to the organizers for tonight's debate. You know, I've been a resident of Peterborough for almost 2 decades, and during that time I've seen the city grow. And the challenges faced by the city also growing. The homelessness, the opioid epidemic, the addictions, you know, rising infrastructure costs, and seniors at the risk of being taxed out of their own properties. You know, there are challenges to be met. You know, when we talk about the employment opportunities, Jeff, you and I'll debate those issues, because when we have to provide the opportunity for home ownership, it is closely aligned with job opportunities. Peterborough's 58 square kilometers. We have no employment lands in our city, and the annexation conversation is now over. It is time to move on and go to an amalgamation to solve some of our local problems.
Thank you. Henry?
Ladies and gentlemen, I really appreciate the opportunity to appear before you tonight. Housing has been something that I have been involved in my entire career on council, and I believe strongly in it. And I'm not just talking about social housing. I'm talking about the retail market as well. Getting houses built for our people. Right now, if a major employer wanted to come here, we don't have anywhere to put the workers, let alone the spaces my colleagues here have spoken about to actually build something. So housing is critical to the future of our city. And that means that all of you, the home builders, the real estate, are critical to our success. If you can't succeed, we can't succeed. And that means it's up to the city, the staff, and the council to provide the leadership that will show you how we can do it, to get the land, to get the zoning, and above all, to improve our processes so that when you want something, it happens when you expect it. I will give you that guarantee that if I am elected mayor, I will make those things happen in conjunction with the council. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we will wrap up our evening. Thank you all very much for your time this evening. And to our audience, thank you very much for being here. Have a great night.
Thank you.